Okay, good evening, friends. Tonight, we're going to do Daf Hashavua and Aleph. And if you're going to hang in there, we have an amazing Eon topic, which is relevant, mamish, to all of Shas, and that's the subject of Dina de Machusa Dina, just to get clear the various Shittos and the Rishonim. So, we begin Chav Zayin Amud Beis on the bottom, where the Mishnah says, Nedarim laharagin ulecharamin ulemeichsen. We could make a neder to murderers, to plunderers, and to tax collectors. Shehi truma, afal pi she'ena truma. You're allowed to make a neder to somebody to a murderer, or to someone who's plundering, or to a tax collector. And you're allowed to say, no, don't take this. Why would you take it? It's truma, and it's asur to a zar, even though it's not truma. Or to say, shehein shel beis hamelech, they belong to the house of the king, afal pi she'enon shel beis hamelech, even though they don't belong to the house of the king. So basically, you're lying, and you're taking a neder, and you're allowed to do this lechatchila in order to save your skin or to save your money. Now, in a way, this is like nidrei oinsin. Nidrei oinsin are not chal. Here we're going to see they are chal. The neder is actually chal to some extent, because ultimately the Gemara is going to say the cases where you had in mind that you're making a neder. You're saying, I promise you, meaning I give you my word that this is truma. If this is not truma, then I answer this on myself as a neder. Now in your mind you're thinking, yeah, I answer on myself as a neder, but I only answer it for one day. Now you didn't say one day. Since it's unqualified, your words are indefinitely. It's indefinitely considered asur. But you didn't, that's what you were thinking. So that's the first halacha of the Mishnah. This is a type of nidrei oinsin. Beis Shammai says b'chol nedarim. You can make a neder with anything, meaning in order to support what you're saying, that let's say for instance this is truma, you can make a neder for anything chutz mi b'shvua, but you can't take a shvua, you can't take an oath, because a shvua is more chamer. Let's see the Ran. The Ran says, Nedarim laharagin, lelistim Yisrael shahargim b'nei adam, to Jewish murderers that kill people. Now here's the thing, if they're going to kill you, so then how is it going to help to tell them it's truma? If they're willing to violate lo yisirtzach, so then probably they would eat truma. No. It's called from murderers. There are many of them. From murderers. They would kill someone, but heaven forbid to eat truma? No, they would never eat truma. So the Ran continues, to exempt yourself from a tax. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean? You're allowed to lie and say it's truma to exempt from tax? How could you exempt yourself from a tax? Don't we say dina de machusa dina? Aren't you obligated to pay taxes? Actually, yeah, okay, fine. Chutz mi b'shvua. Why can't you make a shvua according to Beis Shammai? Says the Ran, de chamira, shvua is chamor, de chsiv ba lo yenake. By shvua it says, you will not be found innocent. So there's a chaymer of a shvua, so therefore according to Beis Shammai you can't take a shvua. Beis Hillel omer maf b'shvua. Beis Hillel says you're even allowed to take a shvua. It doesn't mean you swear that this is truma. It means you swear you're not going to eat the peiros if this is not truma. Okay, so you can't lie. In other words, you can't swear, I swear this is truma. That's straight up, shvua shav. You're lying. What you could do is, you say, if this is not truma, I swear I'm not going to eat it. Now in your mind, you're thinking you're only not going to eat it for one day. Well, that's how the Gemara explains it. Okay. Beis Shammai says you can't advance toward the marauder, to the plunderer, to the murderer, with a neder. It's only if, when you tell them, it's truma, they said, we don't believe you, so then you don't have a choice, you're up against the wall, you can make a neder. But you can't advance with a neder. Beis Hillel says you could even advance the neder. Even though they didn't ask you to take the neder, you could advance the neder. The Gemara continues, the Mishnah continues, only regarding what they tell you to take a neder. In other words, according to Beit Shammai, if they tell you, we don't believe you until you take the neder, you're allowed to take the neder. You're allowed to, they say, asser yourself on apples if this is not truma. And he says, I'll do better, I'll asser myself on apples and oranges. No, according to Beit Shammai, only what they want you to take a neder. You could take a neder even if in what they don't ask you. Ketzad, how is this? Amar Loi, if they say to you, Emar koinim ishti nenesli. If the marauder says, say, you answer with a koinim, your wife, from getting hana. For Amar koinim ishti ubanai nenemli. So Beit Shammai Amrim, Beit Shammai says, Ishtai muteres, your wife is mutter, because that's a valid nidrei oinsim. Ubanav asur, and your children are taka asur. And who asked you to take such a neder? By the way, what about the factor of neder shabbat lo mitzvah shabbat lo kula? Beit Shammai never subscribed to that. Remember? Beis Hillel says they're both mutter because you are allowed to take the additional neder. The question is, do we need that svara? Beis Hillel subscribes to neder shoter mitzasai hotar kulai. Okay, let's see the Ran. B'ma lo yiftach lo b'neder im ein omer nedarli. You can advance with a neder if they don't say take a neder. Only what he says, only what the marauder says to be menader. Shafilu pasach lo yidar el b'mashu madirai. Even if they are the ones who advanced it, you can make a neder only what they asked you. Ishti mutaras ubana yasurin kivan shelo hidiru bahem el me'elav nadar. According to Beit Shammai, if you added to aser your children, you would be aser to your children because they didn't ask you to take that neder. Frek the Gemara, the Mishnah says you're allowed to make a neder to say that something is truma to avoid taxes for tax evasion. I v'amar Shmuel dina d'machusa dina, but Shmuel says dina d'machusa dina. Look in the Ran. Vehechi sharinan lemedar hachi. How is it permitted to take such an eder kedei lihipater, to become exempt from taxes? Kivan de minadin chayiv litein layasamechas. Since meikar adin, you're chayiv to give the taxes. B'moiches she'ein loy kitzba. Answers the Gemara. Amar of Chinana, Amar of Kahana, Amar Shmuel. B'moiches she'ein loy kitzba. We're talking about a tax collector that has no set amount, meaning he's out of control. He's taking more than he's supposed to. We'll see exactly what this means. Doesn't mean that the government gave him permission. Basically, the way tax collectors used to work is, the king wanted taxes. The thing is, it's a pain in the neck to collect them. So he would give a guy a job, collect the taxes, and you get an X amount and the rest give to me. Or you give me X amount and the rest is yours. So the guy would sometimes say, if the rest is mine, I'll overcharge. So if he charges more than he is authorized to, so then you're allowed to evade it. In the house of Yani, so we're talking about a tax collector who's not appointed by the king. But if he's appointed by the king and he's collecting the right amount, you're now to evade taxes. Says the Ran, b'moiches she'ein did I read the first one? Yeah, how are you allowed to make this neder? Kedei lipater kiven de minadin chayv litain lo yasamechas. Says the Ran, b'moiches she'ein lo kitzba. We're talking about a tax collector that has no set amount. V'kiven shekein lav dinahu. It's not a din. Ela cham senusa. He's just grabbing money unlawfully. V'cham senusa demoiches lav dinahu. And grabbing of a tax collector is not a din. Or b'moiches ha'omeid me'elav shaloi b'mitzvas hamelech. Now the rest of the Ran is not authorized, but in the in the Eon share, if you could stick around, the Ran will talk about the ramifications of taxes outside of Eretz Yisrael and in Eretz Yisrael. And according to the Ran, taxes in Chutz La'aretz are more obligatory to pay than taxes in Eretz Yisrael, because it's dependent on real estate ownership, and in Israel, all Jews own the land, so there's less of a right to be taxed. Okay, but we'll have to see, on what basis does halacha say that when the government says pay taxes, you have to pay taxes? In other words, we understand you have to be a loyal citizen, but what's the halachic imperative that obligates you to pay when a government decides that you worked hard, you have a career, you went to school, you worked hard, now the government says, give me some of your money. So what are the halachic obligations toward such a payment? Okay, that's what we'll discuss afterwards. The Gemara continues. Shehein shel beis hamelach, va'afal pi she'enan shel beis hamelach. You say they belong to the king, even though they don't belong to the king. That's another neder that you are allowed to make. Says Gemara, heichi nadar. What exactly is the neder? Meaning, what exactly are you being menadar? What's the terminology? Which is, this is not the first neder the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said, afal pi she'enon truma. Shehi truma, afal pi she'enon truma. But we're asking, what exactly is the neder? Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav, ba'omer, ye'asru purest olam alayim enon shel beis hamelech. I aser all the fruits of the world on me if it doesn't belong to the king. So the Gemara asks, that can't be. Why? Kiven the Amar ye'asru, if he says all the fruits are aser, then itasru alei koper the alma. Then he's going to become aser to all the fruits. So, but the Mishnah implies that this is a trick that you could say. But if you say you answer all the fruits on you forever, or on you, then you're going to be answering all the fruits. Look in the Ran. Heichi nadar. What does it mean, heichi nadar? What's the question exactly? Says the Ran, Lishna demasnisin kashale. We're questioning the language of the Mishnah. Why? The ka'amar noidrin shein truma. It says in the Mishnah, you may take a neder that it's truma. Vehechi shaykh nidra b'hai lishna. How is a neder in this lashon shaykh? Kelaymar, meaning to say, I da amar ya'asru peres olam alai la'olam. What did the guy say? If the guy said, I aser all the fruits of the world on me forever, then what you're thinking cannot nullify what you say. In other words, let's say it like this. If you said explicitly, I ask her all the fruits in the world on me forever, so then even though we know you're thinking not forever, but if you say the words forever and you wanted the guy to think that it's also forever, then your thoughts will not be mavatoet. So it must be here he didn't say forever. He just said unqualified. You're aser the fruits. Yasu persoilam alai unihidastama la'olam mashma. It's true. Stam implies forever. Hani mili hecha deleka unsa. That's if there's no oinus. Mishum detfei mashma la'olam mi mehayim. Because in general, if your statement remains unqualified, your words imply that you're aser forever more than just today. But where there's an oinus, but when there's an oinus, the oinus explains and clarifies what you meant. That you said, even though you said unqualified, but we assume it means now. 1 second. Is this... I think this is an explanation. Again, the first question is, what did he say? What did he say? I guess we're assuming that if he said la'olam, then the fact that there's an oinus is not going to change it. So the Gemara says where he just said Yesru perso amalai im einam shel beis hamelach. To which the Gemara asks, if he taka said you're answering all the fruits, then you're going to become usher to all the fruits. It's interesting, the Ran doesn't really explain this line of the Gemara. I guess at this point the Gemara is assuming that if you leave your statement unqualified, then we have to assume it means la'olam, and even though you say otherwise, or think other, or even though you say you were thinking otherwise, it's dvarim shabalev. So the Gemara has no choice but to say, you know what the case is, ba'omer hayoim, where the guy says, I asked her all the fruits today. So Gemara says, if the guy says explicitly that I'm only answering the fruits today, that's so uncompelling. Then the murderer is not going to back off. He's going to say, I don't believe you that it's truma. What proof is there that it's truma? Because you're willing to answer all the fruits today? A person could go a day without fruits. Says Gemara, Ba'omer hayoim, Ida amar hayoim, lo mekablim minei moiches. If you just say today, the tax collector, he's not going to accept what you're saying. Says Gemara, Ba'omer beliboy hayoim, umoitzi b'svasav stam. You were thinking today, but you said that your nether is unqualified. Normally, if you make a nether unqualified, then we have to go with what you probably mean, namely forever. And if you say, no, I was only thinking today, we say it's dvarim shabalev einam dvarim. Here, the oines allows us to accept your qualification that you only meant to asera today. Here, v'yafa gav desfirla dvarim shabalev einam dvarim, even though in generally we maintain dvarim shabalev einam dvarim, legabi oinsen shani, legabi oines, it's different. And the oinus clarifies that if you tell us you were thinking hayoim, then you're only going to be aser hayoim. Okay. The Gemara continues. Beis Shammai oimrim bakol. Beis Shammai says you could do anything. You could even make a shvua. Beis Shammai oimrim b'mashu madira. You can only make a neder on what they ask you. Ubeis Hillel oimrim af b'sheinu madira. Keitzad. This is just a quotation from the Mishnah. Keitzad amar loy koinem mishinenesli. They say, my wife is aser in a koinem, v'amar koinem ishti ubanai nenamli, and he adds his children meshama yomim ishtai muteres ubanav asurin, ubeis hillel oimrim elu ve'elu mutarim. Okay. So now, again, the Mishnah holds, according to Beis Shammai, you can't offer anything, and even if they ask you, you can add, and you can't make a shvua. And Beis Hillel says you could initiate, and you can even make a shvua. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Tana Beis Shammai oimrim lo yiftach lo b'shvua. Beis Shammai says you can't initiate with a shvua. Beis Hillel says you could advance with the shvua. Beis Shammai, so we can make two diyukim here. Or Beis Shammai, you can't advance with the shvua, but you could advance with the neder. Beis Shammai b'shvu la yiftach. You can't advance with the shvua, you could advance with the neder. But we learned in the Mishnah about Tanam Beis Shammai Omrim La Yiftach B'Neder. Beis Shammai taught in the Mishnah you can't advance with a neder. And secondly, V'su, and further, Miftachu D'Lo Yiftach B'Shvua, you can't advance with a Shvua. But Hameder Nadar B'Shvua. You can't advance with a Shvua. But if they ask you to make a Shvua, you could. Hameder Nadar B'Shvua. But you could promise to them with a shvua if they ask you. Beis Shammai says you can make a neder with anything, but not with a shvua. Meaning you could promise with anything, but not a shvua. So first of all, the language of the brisa implies that you can't advance with a shvua, but you could advance with a neder. That's against the Mishnah. And it says you can't advance with a shvua, but you could make one. So Gemara says no. The answer is really, when it says Beis Shammai says you can't advance with a shvua, it means you can't advance with a neder. You know why it picked a shvua? To teach you a chiddush in Beis Hillel. The Beis Hillel says you could advance with a shvua, but in Beis Shammai you can't advance even with a neder, and you can't make a shvua altogether. Says the Gemara, Tana masnisen beneder. Our Mishnah was talking about a neder to tell you the strength of Beis Shammai. The Beis Shammai says you can't advance with a neder. Tana Braisa b'shvua. The Braisa taught a shvua that according to Beis Shammai you can't advance with a shvua. So to learn out the leniency in Beis Hillel that you could advance with a shvua. To teach the koyach of Beis Hillel, says the Ran. Tana masnisim beneder lo ydiacha koichan de Beis Shammai dafilu beneder lo yiftach. Tana Braisa shua decha koicha de Beis Hillel dafilu b'shvua yiftach. And the Gemara gives a second answer. Rav Ashi Amar Hachi Katani. Rav Ashi says this is what it is trying to say. Beis Shammai Oimrim Lo Yiftach Lo B'Shvua. This is, the Brisa is not even talking about Nidrei Oinsim. Lo Yiftach Lo B'Shvua means Beis Shammai Oimrim in She'ela B'Shvua. You can't be mater a Shvua by a Chacham through She'ela. Beis Hillel Oimrim Yesh She'ela B'Shvua. Beis Hillel says you could mater a Shvua. Lo Yiftach Lo B'Shvua is not talking about Lo Yiftach Lo B'Shvua is not talking about advancing a shvua to a marauder. It's talking about being mater shvuas in general. Rav Ashi Amar Hachi Katani Beis Shammai Oimrim Ein She'ela B'Shvua U'Beis Hillel Oimrim Yesh She'ela B'Shvua. Says the Ran. Rav Ashi Amar Hachi Kamar Beis Shammai Oimrim Ein She'ela B'Shvua V'Loi Mitukma Hach Braisa B'Nishba Laharagin Klal Ela Hachi Kamar Misha Nishba Al Davar Lo Yiftach Loi Chacham lahater loy shvua soy she'ein she'ela b'shvua Beis Hillel Oimrim yesh she'ela. This Mishnah is not talking about, this Brisa is not talking about swearing to Haragin at all. What it's talking about is somebody who swore on something, the Chacham should not be poiseach for him to mater a shvua, because there's no she'ela b'shvua, and Beis Hillel says there is she'ela b'shvua. Okay, that is Daf Chavches Amud Aleph. And now you have the schus to hear a little bit about the amazing topic of Dina de Malchus Dina. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. Don't go anywhere.